Remembering death. Remember death? That's one of the things that we do on this day, is we remember death. And it's the kind of thing that we don't want to remember, we don't like to remember. And it's funny because we all know that death is not simply a medical failure, it is simply a part of life. And so it's going to come to all of us. And yet, we can live our lives with a kind of secret, little secret that we don't tell people, which is maybe I'll be the one who escapes it of all the people in history. And we won't. And so this day helps us to remember death. But it doesn't help us, it doesn't ask us to remember death because it's kind of some kind of, morbid preoccupation. It asks us to remember death the way that we remember that God is present in all things. That's what we believe about death as well, is that God can use death just like God can use everything else in this world, everything else in our lives. And so God can use death to give himself to us for free. And that's God's biggest problem. God's biggest problem is how to give himself to us for free as a gift, because we keep saying, oh no, not me, God. No, not yet. I've got a couple of habits that I need to take care of, and then you can give yourself to me. I might need another 5 years. Can you give me a little more time? Or maybe you could give those to Sister Mary Ann. She's very spiritual, and you could give yourself to her. But me? No, I'm not ready. And God's trying to give himself to us as gift, as he gives the Spirit, the gift of the Spirit to us. And the gift of the Spirit is not a gift just from God. It's the gift of God's own self. God, the Holy Spirit, is the gift of God's own self. And in the Eucharist, God gives us his very self, his own life. And so what our faith believes is that God can use death just like God uses everything else, as a way to give himself to us. And I don't know if you've ever been around a loved one, near a loved one, as they approach death. And it's miraculous to see how God uses death to give himself to that person in so many different ways, and in ways that we will never know. But you can tell the difference. You can tell something that's happened to the person. There's been a change, there's been a conversion, there's been something that happens. And you can tell that God has used this too, as God uses everything else, to make himself present to us and to give himself to us. And who can face death without asking the question, God? Because we know that everyone has the question of God. Even atheists have the question of God. They may have different answers for it, but they've asked the question. And who can come to death without the question of God coming to us and God finding ways to give himself to us? I have a Jewish friend who I went to see one time, and he told me about a project that he had, a new project. And he said that there's quite a tradition in his faith of anonymous giving. And we can give anonymously in so many different ways. We can give a donation to Catholic Charities. And in many ways, it's a double-bind anonymous gift, because we don't know who it goes to, and the person who receives it don't know where it came from. And so there's an anonymous giving, the way Jesus talks about here. We won't know what our left hand, but there are other ways to give anonymously. And my Jewish friend wanted to help someone in a way that nobody would ever know he'd helped them. And so he'd been praying. And he said, I've been praying about this a long time, and I think I know how much money I want to give to this, and I've prayed to God, and I think I know the person. And now I've got to get the plan. I've got to get the plan, and I've got to ask God, help me with the plan. How do I get this gift to this person in a way that nobody in this world will ever know that I did it? So that I take the secret to my grave and I can talk to God about it afterwards. You know that time I gave and nobody ever knew. And he said, it's not as easy as it might seem. But I have been praying about how now I can do that. I can do that good deed. And nobody will ever know except me and God. He took his giving seriously. He took his God and his giving to God very seriously. They say that there's a Native American tradition, and I did a little work with Native Americans, and people say all kinds of things about Native Americans, and you never know whether it's accurate or not, and so I don't know if this is a true story or not either. But it should be if it isn't, and it's a great story. They say that there are some tribes where when the young man needs to go on a quest to have that experience that moves him from being a child to being a young man, that one of the things that this tribe does is he must go into the wilderness. And there he has to find a bear or a wolf or some wild animal, a mountain lion. He has to find a ferocious wild animal, a strong wild animal. And he has to kill that animal. And he can't come back until he does it. And when he comes back to the tribe, though, he can never tell the story. Ever. He can never tell anyone how he did it, what the animal was. He cannot tell. And his whole life, he holds the story. He holds the story deep inside of himself. And when anyone treats him as they don't know who he is, he knows the real story. And when people treat him in a way that he doesn't, that's without respect but he knows the story. He can go to the story within that only he knows. And it gives a kind of strength and a kind of strength that nothing else can give. Now, I don't know if that's a true story, but it's a great story. But both of those stories say something about what Lent and Ash Wednesday is about. Because the penances that we take up during Lent, the penance to give something up, the penance to take something more on, the fasting, the giving to the poor, the purpose of them is not it's not for them to be hard. It's not for them to get out the flage and hurt ourselves. It's not out of self-hatred, and it cannot be out of punishing ourselves. Instead, we take up those things because they do what that story, that Native American story and that Jewish story do. They force us to turn within. When we give up something that we are so reliant on and maybe over-reliant on, like maybe if we gave up our boredom to God, and we could just sit with God when we're bored, and we would give our boredom to God, and we'd turn off the phone and the Twitter, and we'd turn off all the electronics, and we would give our boredom to God. And what it forces us to do is to go within, to go in to the place where we are most real and where God is so deeply present in the center of our beings. And when we fast, and we have to muster the patience and the discipline to stand in our hunger, the point is to turn us within. is to turn us within to become the person who isn't just feelings, but the person who has feelings. Not the person who is their feelings, but the person who simply has feelings and can then make decisions about the feelings that they have instead of simply being their feelings. Now, I don't have to tell you that I'm not too good at this. This doesn't happen by accident. I worked at this. But I know what it's about. I know what Lent is about. It's about taking up the disciplines and the penance that will cause us to turn within, to the interior life, where God lives always within us, where the gift of God's Spirit is within us, where Christ is present to us. And we know that Christ is present to us because when a person is present to another person, what they do is communicate meaning. We communicate the meaning of ourselves to the other person. And when we receive meanings, divine meanings about the teaching of Jesus Christ, when we go within and we receive, and our life suddenly becomes meaningful because in our prayer and our talking to God, we get an insight, or we begin to wonder about something, or we ask a question we need to ask that would lead us in the direction of a truth. And when we receive that meaning, we know that Christ is present and he's communicating meaning to us. And we communicate back to him the meaning of who we are. And we are in communion with the Christ who lives within us and all around us. And so, let us take up our Lenten penances. Not something to just be hard and make our lives miserable. That misses it. Instead, let us take up a penance that will turn us within so that we can find Christ present within us.